day to you. Terence Baker, news editor, EMEA for CoStar News Hotels, part of STR and CoStar. We are here live from the first day of the International Hotel Investment Forum in Berlin. I am very happy to be here with David Taylor. He's CEO of Q Green Hotels. Welcome, David. Thank you for your time. It's very much appreciated.
Terence. You're welcome.
When I first started, David, writing about this particular sector, industry, 2013, 2014, one of the earliest, most exciting developments was the rise of companies such as yours, third-party, white label, call it what you will. There was Q Green Hotels and there was Jupiter, and
That's
maybe
right.
one or two others. Can you give me a potted history of Q Green in the last 10 years, how it came about, what the need was, and how you've transformed?
Yeah, I mean, the company goes back to the early 2000s when it was originally formed in Q Green in a coffee shop, and then grew through a series of acquisitions, ultimately to a point 10 years ago from now in 2015 when it was acquired by a company called CTG, China Travel Group. And by that time, it had built itself up through a series of acquisitions up to around 50 hotels. And just over 40 of them were outright owned and the remainder were managed. And in the last 10 years, in that time, CTG have essentially been investing in the portfolio. We've invested in a back office in terms of technology and so on. And we're now, I think, in a position where we're ready for the next phase of growth for the company. So I think when you have a big investor, an international investor who has a lot of experience, in their eyes, it's essential for them to make sure that the company has a strong infrastructure, strong management team, strong capability before they then start to invest further. And our investors have got a very long-term view. So they've now been owners of the company for 10 years. I was recently in Beijing and spent some time with them, and they're quite eager, I think, for us now to use the skills that we've developed over the last probably 5 or 6 years, actually, in terms of building data warehousing and making things more efficient, to be ready to then start to grow further internationally. So currently we've got hotels mainly in England under Q Green, and then our CTG ownership has a portfolio of hotels in the Far East, including Thailand, China, and other Far Eastern countries, in excess of 200 hotels over there through both ownership and managed. That's a great relationship because they can learn a lot from what we're doing here in the UK and how we're developing our business, but equally we can learn a lot from them. And one of the things I noticed very obviously when I was in China is their application of technology in terms of how they're using that to improve, I think, the guest experience and also make the hotel operation significantly more efficient. So there's a nice partnership at the moment where they're learning from us and we're learning from them. And I think that can be very fruitful moving forwards.
It may not be the hardest sell to say, here we are, a company, we're going to sit in the middle between the brands and the owners. We're looking after the owners, we're keeping the brands to account. You say mainly in Britain, few in Asia because of your relationship with CTG. What is the notion of expanding through into Europe? And I know this model also is getting some traction in Africa. Yes. A few big companies there, and probably in India. But what's the notion of where you're going?
I think if I can describe it like this, it will probably help. Because we have a high proportion of our hotels are owned, that means that we have to make sure that those hotels are operating extremely well, because when we're talking to investors and developers, they want to see how we're performing ourselves and they want to then essentially trust us with their assets. So my mantra with our team is that we have to basically treat any hotel from any owner in exactly the same way as we treat our own. We integrate them fully into our operating structure and we are meticulous with them in terms of making sure that we can deliver the right investor return. Now, you mentioned we're in a unique position because we work with a number of brands. Many are IHG, but we work with other brands also. So yes, it gives us quite a loud voice at the table to hold them to account, and we've got very positive partnerships there because I think they trust our opinion because we're quite nimble, we can move very fast, and being, I think, an owner-manager company allows us to test and learn. So we can create a situation where we've almost got a living laboratory in some hotels. And I think that really interests the big brands. But at the same time, it also interests investors because if they went solely with the brand, of course, that offers them many different benefits, but it may not have the additional overlay of that nimbleness in market and that ability to innovate very quickly. So I think we're quite fortunate that we can offer the best of both worlds. Scale that up into the European environment, or even wider than that, then the market is emerging at different rates and different paces from one country to the next. There are some sectors which are particularly interested in taking advantage of either technology or operational efficiency. And there are bits of our business from either CTG or through Q Green that we can bring up and offer and say, look, we've got expertise in this and we can help you there. That's quite helpful for us because it means that when we're talking to potential investors, we've got lots of different things that we can discuss. We're not just a company that says, well, we operate to this brand and that's the way that it is. We're not just a company that says we're only ever going to be, driving as much profit out of this asset as we possibly can, with the corresponding risks that brings. So we take a holistic view to the whole thing, where we're looking to get the maximum benefit across all parts of the business for investors.
As Q Green's ownership wants you perhaps to scale, is scale an enemy of your kind of model, or would you need more feet on the ground in different markets if you were to expand? How does scale look for you in terms of the nuts and bolts of doing that in a meaningful and profitable way?
It's an excellent question because I think if we have hotels in a market where we don't have our own personnel, it becomes a bit more challenging. We're then relying exclusively on the personnel locally in those hotels to then perform for you. Now, we can help that through training and assimilation into the main Q Green company. But I always think it's best if we can essentially be there with them and support them in the way that they're working. Invariably, it would mean that we would look to add resource in those locations. But fundamentally, it should be a seamless integration into the way that Q Green is operating, where we've demonstrated our ability to maximize commercial returns for the hotels, improve operating efficiencies, and improve the asset values. So I don't think you can do it without adding some sort of support or resource at local level. I think it's very difficult to manage it remotely, all from a structure in the UK and then just direct operations externally. I always think partnership works much better. So to be there, not necessarily holding hand, but to be supportive, to look at the unique facets of those businesses, to understand them fully, prepare solutions, and then make sure that we have a way to implement the solutions into their businesses.
Right. In 2026, let's talk about the United Kingdom, Ireland, your major business. 2026 was supposed to be the year the government tamed inflation, interest rates would have followed, we'd all have a bit more disposable income in our pocket. The current horrible conflict in the Middle East might pay scupper to that. How do you see UK and Ireland business in the next year?
It's a really good question because, the UK does have a lot of inbound business, particularly from the US and other markets. There's a question mark as to whether that will be affected or not at this stage. The UK provinces are generally fairly stable, though. People continue to go about doing their business. They still have meetings to attend. They still have clients to see. So we're not really seeing any impact at all at this stage because we still have to go about doing our jobs. Longer term, I'm not sure what that looks like. But one thing I do know is that we are very used to dealing with crises and upturns and downturns in this industry. And we're very good at reading the data as well and looking at the signs. And I think if we saw some stress in the market, we'd be pretty quick to react to that and to make sure that we protect our investors. But ultimately, it's too early to call, I think. But, I think probably there will be some impact. You're certainly seeing it now in terms of forward pricing on energy. You'll see it fairly soon in terms of the rate of inflation, where as you said, everybody was hoping we would have a bit of stability and more normal rates of inflation this year. That sadly doesn't look as though it's going to be achievable, particularly with the Bank of England now being a bit more guarded in terms of interest rate increases. So I think there probably will be some instability, let's call it, and it's our ability to adapt to that, which will see those who really understand how to do it well versus those who don't. But many good operators in the industry have gone through lots of challenges like this in a similar way. So I think we're all pretty well experienced at that, and we should be able to manage it through quite well. The most important thing for me is to make sure that we look after our employees and that we continue to train and develop them, because that's for the long term. One of the things I'm conscious of in this industry is the industry can sometimes take too many short-term decisions, and I think that's not necessarily helpful. So I'll always be looking strategically at how do we navigate our way through this and make sure we protect the business and be ready for growth when things become more normal.
I imagine we'll hear a lot of that in the first couple of days of this conference. And lastly, probably a question I'm going to ask several of the people I interview at the conference. Sustainability and AI, two separate things.
Yes.
A lot of sustainability, the insurance industry is looking with laser focus at hotels and exposure. The Middle East again is playing into that. How do you see sustainability coming through in terms of a financing? Because my opinion is you can have a carrot and you can have a stick, and the hotel industry, I think, will benefit from a bit of both.
Yeah.
But the finance is probably more of a stick. I mean, how do you see sustainability rolling out further in the next couple of years? And then maybe one or two comments on AI and what you're doing there.
I had a lot of experience on sustainability in my previous role in Croatia, where I was there for 6 years, and they're super sensitive about it over there because of protecting the sea and the landscape and so on. One of the things I learned during that time is that sustainability is more than just about single-use plastics. It's about taking a completely 360-degree approach to everything concerning the business. So it's about having a sustainable business that will be there for the long term. So it's not just about how we manage waste and energy and plastic consumption. It's also about how we manage our assets. How do we prepare them for the future? How do we work with our teams? How do we train them, coach them, develop them, and help them understand what's required today and in the future? Obviously, we've got a strong partnership with IHG where we're working for the long term towards our sustainability goals. In my position, I want to accelerate that because I want us to begin to understand within the business that essentially it's not just about cutting down on water and so on. I want everybody to understand that it's about protecting the business for the long term. To bring it back to your question in terms of the financial approach and that being the stake, yes, that's true, but also it can be an enormous motivator as well. And I think, when people begin to understand sustainability is not just about, a few pence here on a plastic bottle or whatever. It's about making sure that ultimately there are so many different practices across the business that affect all parts of the business that together create one net result. That net result ultimately is the bit that gives investors and finance the reassurance that it needs. I don't think they're impressed at single policies which says, do you know what, we saved X amount of money on water consumption because we put in some filters on taps or whatever. I think they're more willing to invest in companies where they know that there is a more robust program which covers all parts of the business. Future-proofing it. And not just about the hotel operation and the staff within them, but also the supply chain. How do we actually make sure that we're working with a supply chain that has the same methodology, thinking, and best practice as us, that complements the way that we work? When you put all of that together, that can be quite a powerful mechanism within a business to not just improve performance and results, but actually to set the business up for the long term, not just for the short term.
Indeed. And very quickly, anything on AI? How do you see that rolling out?
I've spent a lot of time looking at AI and being involved in various discussions within the industry and looking at various solutions. I want AI to help us. will it replace jobs? That's the first question I get asked about it. The answer is maybe, but ultimately we are a hospitality business. We're in the business of making sure that the guests have a wonderful stay. If I can use AI to help and support that, I will. But if I feel that it's a hindrance or it's doing something to the business that ultimately doesn't help with the guest or the performance of the business, then I won't. But there are certainly elements of AI which we're already using at the moment, which are beginning to have a profound effect on the business in terms of the way that we communicate internally, the way that we share information, the way that we analyze data, and we actually begin to see more about what the guest needs and how we respond to a business to that. That, I think, is a great use of AI.
David Taylor, TUI Green Hotels, thank you ever so much.
Thanks. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. I'm Terence Baker, News Editor, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and I'm the host of The Upgrade, a CoStar News Hotels podcast for the EMEA region. In it, I discuss with special guests the pressures, challenges, joys and exhilaration that comes with managing, owning and developing hotels in our glorious multifaceted industry. Discovering the EMEA region from the scenic northern shores of Norway to a heights of Table Mountain in South Africa, and most likely some chat about birdwatching, distance running and the English Premiership. Join us wherever you find your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify and on other platforms.
This episode was recorded on March 23rd, 2026 at the International Hospitality Investment Forum in Berlin by Meredith Sheridan. It was edited for podcast by Sean McCracken. Visit costar.com/hotel news for more of our coverage and find all of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen.